might be my most prolific year at the LA Times in terms of everything that I wrote about, everything that I covered.
I think we know why he's
the awards, proclamation for Congress, I was kicking ass in 2024, and yet I find myself completely uncomfortable. As much as I resisted even just having my name out there first on anything, the reality is I kind of run out of places to hide. I keep next level. There is no next level for me. I've worked at basically every major newspaper, every major television station, and I've worked in all the major cities. The next level is just me. I've built a career looking at the intersection of sports. NBA gets it right. Culture. Because you wanted to check my black card. In politics, I see it as a reflection of this will continue to be an extension of that.
If the money's no good or the location.
To find a comedian who believes that,
Welcome to the LZ Granderson Show. Welcome to the LZ Granderson Show. I am your host, LZ. Today is Thursday, August 28th, and I have started teaching school again. For those of you who don't know, I love being an educator. I've been really blessed in my career to be able to both teach as an adjunct pretty much since the very beginning of my journalism career. And it's carried me all the way through in a full circle moment to the point in which I've now been hired full time to teach at my alma mater where it all started. So I was in class today, and it was absolutely amazing because I've had a couple of students return who took me last year, so that means I didn't fuck up too bad. I hope, but also a couple of them had some wonderful job opportunities, and they thanked me for the lectures and the classes that we had last year. They felt that it prepared them for the opportunities that they have facing going ahead. And so it was really cool to kind of have that kind of full circle moment, both as me being a professional journalist back at where I started, but then to be able to be an influence and a blessing to other young people who want to come into this field. It was pretty awesome. And that's why I can't wait for you to hear this conversation today with the new president of Western Michigan University, Russ Kavalhuna. Russ is also a Western Michigan University graduate like myself, and he too is returning home. I am teaching. He is running the whole damn thing as president. The 10th, he was hired in the spring, and this is his first fall. He's so cool. I can't begin to tell you just how fortunate this class of students and the future classes of students are to have this man be in charge, because he has such a heart for the campus and for the city of Kalamazoo, where the campus is located. And I've always believed that the number one attribute for any civic leader, they have to really care about the people that they're serving. And Russ, man, he really cares. And so we have this amazing conversation, about, all the things that it's going through the minds of a university president right now, whether it's, conversations dealing with the White House, conversations about NIL. Western Michigan University just won the national championship in hockey. How do you keep a coach when you're a mid-major university, when the big dogs are coming? And we talk about getting the munchies. Well, mostly me, but he laughed. So I guess he knew what I was talking about. Anyway, it's a full-on conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. And thank you again for all the subscribers for supporting the show, and those of you who have been listening to the clips. This is a labor of love for me and Tucker and everyone that's involved. And I've just been so blessed through this process. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart. And here's Russ Kavalhuna. Russ Kavalhuna, first of all, congratulations. What are you, 1 month into your new gig? Is that correct time-wise?
Yeah, 1 month in. 1 month in.
Where have you been to most often, the Student Center or Sweetwater's Donut Mill?
Oh, so I have not been to Sweetwater since I came back to Kalamazoo. But candidly, because of that question, I will fix that absence. I don't know if you've been back to the new student center, LZ, since you've been teaching here. I know it's a lot different than what you experienced and I experienced the Bernhardt Center, but the student center it's pretty remarkable. It's a lot better than what you and I had when we were here.
Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable. I'll be honest with you. I went over to the old student center and I took a brick. I took 2 bricks actually. They're part of my bookcase. My book. What are those things called? They hold the books together. I'm trying to complete
Oh
blank.
yeah. What are those things? I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
We'll come up
whatever
with
they
that.
are. I'm using a couple of bricks from the Bernhardt Center to hold up some books in my library at home. So that center does mean a lot to me. I actually worked there my freshman year. Downstairs there was a coffee shop. I was a barista down there for the first year of my college experience at Western. So that center definitely meant a lot to me. But the new center, to your point, holy cow, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. But I did not know that you were slinging coffee in the basement of the Bernhardt Center. That is where you got your greatness. It all makes sense now, and I know why you've
Dude,
got one of those red bricks with the holes in them. You know, the round holes in them. They're all
yep,
over the place. Everyone
yep.
everyone who was around the Bernhardt Center got one of those bricks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Larico's is what the place was called. I remember the name. I used to listen to. All we played was Billy Joel, Elton John, and Bob Marley really loud the entire time. And I was in charge. I was in charge of actually baking more than making coffee. So I wouldn't follow the recipes because I thought there wasn't enough flavor in them. So I would make them black, and I would season them up more than, than what the recipes required.
Who was in charge of those artists? Who decided that those were your 3 artists on your rotation?
You know what? So we try to figure out a collection of songs that was popular enough so that everyone would kind of know what they sounded like when they walked by, and you can kind of sing along. And we obviously didn't want to do anything that was going to have any bad language in it, and we didn't want anything that was going to be too hard to listen to over and over again, right? Like you can listen to like Bon Jovi once, REM once, but you don't want to hear that same CD over and over again for an 8-hour shift. So it came down to, what's the best elevator music that won't make us go crazy.
Yeah. Again, this is experience-driven learning that you get at Western Michigan University that almost no other place can deliver.
Absolutely. Did you work on campus when you were a student?
Kind of. I was a flight instructor, so
Oh, well, that's much better than making muffins in the basement of the Bernhardt Center.
well, I also, didn't like some of the recipes in the cocktail. On occasion asked to change the recipes. But my campus job was in Battle Creek. As you know, the main campus for our university is in Kalamazoo, but the aviation campus, which I'm really proud of having been a product of, a lot of students go to Battle Creek all the students when I was there go to Battle Creek for the flight training, and that's where my campus job was.
Isn't there a Sweetwater's in Battle Creek too?
Yep, I think it's the original.
I
I
the
think
reason why
LZ.
I need to tell listeners the reason why I know so much about Sweetwater's is twofold. One, that's literally where I spent most of my time studying, and also two, when my husband and I got married in Kalamazoo, instead of having a traditional wedding cake, we actually had a big giant pile of Sweetwater donuts for people. And
Is he from Kalamazoo or Battle Creek too? I mean, did you force this on him, this poor man?
well, we were trying to figure out a way to get married so that all of our friends and families can easily get to. He's
Yeah.
from West Michigan. He's from like the Holland area, and
Okay.
I'm from Detroit. So we thought Kazoo was a good middle spot because we have friends in Chicago who drove over as well. A couple of friends flew in. God bless them. But yeah, it was agreed upon in terms of location, not because I was trying to convert him to Kazoo.
But did he know what he was buying into with the wedding cake substituted for Sweetwater's donuts? Was he like?
He was all in. We've gone to Western for football games throughout our relationship.
Okay.
And so he knew, Sweetwater's was just part of the equation. It's like I-94 in Sweetwater's. Everything else is up for debate. But those are the two things we got to have.
I need to go to the provost at this university and set up a minor, the LZ Granderson minor in Sweetwater's Donut.
I gotta tell you, Russ, when I moved back, I did not know that Sweetwater's was no longer 24 hours. And so we were watching, I think we were watching we were on a Star Wars binge. And before we decided to start watching Return of the Jedi, I was like, I'm going to run to Sweetwater's and get some donuts. And so he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. So I drive all the way over there and I'm banging on the window because I can't believe it's no longer 24 hours. I'm like, are you kidding me? What happened to America?
All your congresswoman.
Exactly. So, yeah, you're back. I'm back to a place that I went to school and where I find to be home because that's where I matured from, growing up in Detroit, being there 17, 18 years old. I grew up in Kalamazoo, but you were born and raised in Kalamazoo. So what is it like for you to be back? Because it can't just be nostalgia, right?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, it feels very nostalgic. I mean, I understand the dichotomy you're outlining because I have some of that too. I do feel like here on this campus was where I did a lot of necessary growing up and formative kind of struggles to get through to be the adult that I hoped to become. But yeah, I was born in Kalamazoo. I was raised in this area. I went to high school in this area. So I have even more memories and kind of heartstrings than you do, and they're even more emotional than not to minimize the emotion associated with what I hear you saying, but Southwest Michigan has a feel to it, and that feeling resonates in your body, and I know that sounds kind of ephemeral or something, but I'm telling you, I can remember feeling that early in my life. I tell a story with my dad and I used to come to the hockey games here at the hockey arena called Lawson when I was 6 years old. And I can still remember the smell of that place. I can still remember there's a part of our town here in Kalamazoo that has brick roads. And that's not unique to Kalamazoo or Southwest Michigan. But for a little person that noticed and asked my grandpa, like, why are the roads brick? And having him explain that that's the way roads were built. And then there was a Coney restaurant that my grandpa would always take me to where we'd actually have Coney dogs. So these types of things are kind of interwoven in my brain's memory of my youth. And then I go, like I said, I share with you, LZ, this idea that most of what's good in my life as an adult can be retraced to things I learned or things I messed up and learned from in my college experience at Western.
What pops in mind when you start saying that? What's like sort of like the one or two things as you're saying your maturation happened on campus? What immediately pops in your head?
Okay, so some of it is embarrassing mistakes I made, which I probably won't share all of them here. But
I just told you I was basically smoking pot and eating donuts watching Star Wars because everyone knows the only reason why you're running out to get some donuts at like midnight or whatever is because you got the munchies. So don't worry about being embarrassed.
I didn't draw that conclusion. I mean, you were getting ready to watch Return of the Jedi, and anyone who likes Star Wars knows that, if you're going to start Return of the Jedi, you can't stop it because it's such a good movie. And if you're going to start it late, you might as well get something to eat because you're going to be in for a long haul. So I wasn't making those assumptions. And plus, we're not all LZ Granderson. That, we don't all have this amazing history after Western to rely upon so that we can comfortably disclose our foibles in our team.
Fair enough.
But, I mean, when I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. And I learned a lot of lessons about that. I also had the occasion to interact with some people that were really good leaders and started to get me excited and interested in what leaders could do to change things around them. And I started to get really interested in the idea that might I be able to do leadership? And then, of course, I mean, when you're at a university and you're away from where you grew up. Oftentimes you start to build relationships. Some of them are romantic, and some of them are platonic, and those are relationships that still exist to me in my life today. You also start to figure out, what are you going to do with yourself? What's the intersection of your interests and your skills, and finding a way to pay the bills. And I was only half joking, LZ. Like, some of us really struggle with that. We're not all LZ Granderson, writing and speaking on fun topics
Hey
like you.
man, trust me, I came up on the rough side of the mountain too. I didn't just work in Larico's. I also worked. I did landscaping on campus, so I would get up like at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, go over to the plant building, get in the little cart, go over. I cut grass all morning before my first classes. I worked at that convenience store that's now closed. That's kind of near the plant center that used to be 24 hours. I used to work third shift.
That was the Mart. That was Dairy Mart.
Dairy Mart. I worked at Dairy Mart. I worked the third shift, and I would work third shift, and then after that, I would go to class. And I had Ben Johnson over at Sproul. I had a couple over courses immediately after class, and they did not give a hoot that I was exhausted. So trust me, it might be looking good now, but the climb up was. I worked every single semester that I was a student on campus.
Well, that's something that you and I share then, because your formative years at WMU, where I can hear you say it now, and I've heard you say in other venues that Western left a mark on your trajectory, but also it's a place where you can look back and see that you started to put some markers down on your path about where you were headed, and I have that in spades here. I was in one summer during my college years, I was a garbage man. I would, it was in my, it was a small, I went to high school in a small farm town about 15 miles to the east of Kalamazoo. And I got a job working for the Department of Public Works there. And my job was to mow the lawns at the cemetery, clean up the garbage at the parks, and water the flowers on the main street and pick up the garbage on the main street. And I tell you that because I learned a lot about leadership and the power of leadership because I was in a truck all day by myself. It was mostly a garbage truck or a dump truck. And we had radios. There were no cell phones. And we had call signs. And the leader of the operation had a call sign that was 501, and each of us had our own call sign. And
what was yours?
It was like higher. The higher the number, the less important you were. So like there were probably 15 guys on this crew, hardworking guys, full-time guys. I mean, people fixing dams and picking up broken down utility poles with live wires. And my job was the garbage. So I was the lowest of the low on this 15-man crew. And I think I was like 805 or something like that. But 501 was the boss. And I don't even remember this guy's name. But I can tell you, I remember learning about the power of leadership because when 501 came on the radio, you'd have to call your own call sign out. And then the way people responded on the radio indicated how they felt about the person who was on the radio. And sometimes I'd have to call and say, I'm coming to this park and I'm going to get this garbage. Or maybe they'd call me and say, hey, you forgot to get this garbage. There's overflowing garbage at this one park. So 802 or whatever they called me, 802, get your butt over there, yada, yada. But when 501 got on the radio, LZ, I mean, his communications were crisp. They were clear. He was always optimistic, but also very, very accountable. And when he sensed that people were in trouble, he would direct people how to help. In fact, many times jump in himself. And kind of like, your brain remembers a smell. I can remember the sound of his voice and how people reacted to him. And here we are, probably 30 years later, I still see that is an effective way to be a good leader, which is to model behavior. And it can happen even in the kind of minuscule way that a voice comes over a radio in a truck for a 17-year-old punk. It made an impact on me. And that's just one example of what the college experience and the jobs that we schlep around during the college experience can have.
I'm so glad that we had a similar, background in terms of growing up. And like I worked basically from like 12 up until now. So this is like year 40 of me working nonstop. And sometimes it's work and it's a job. And sometimes I actually get paid to do things that I love. And so it feels less and less of a job. Um, 1 month in, where does this position land for you? Does it feel like a job or does it feel like, hey, you guys are paying me to do this?
It's definitely on that latter part. I mean, I've told folks this feels like a dream come true, and I did not start working at 12, LZ, but I started working in my teens, and I had some dirty jobs. And man, this job is really really fun for a couple reasons. One, I've had a couple other careers where my job was really important, but I wasn't quite sure I was making the difference around me. So I was an airline pilot for a while, and I loved that job, and it was an interesting and important job. But there was some monotony associated with that, and some of the big decisions about whether we were going to open up a new terminal somewhere, or where we are going to do new routes, or which type of aircraft we would buy. Those just weren't part of my job. That's fine, but I wanted to be more involved in kind of the direction of the institution that I was serving. I was a lawyer and a prosecutor for a while, and I worked really hard to do those jobs, and I cared about that and the public service associated with them. But I was working with some people who were pretty dangerous and sometimes not the most redeemable part of society. But this job, I have the blessing of being able to work at an institution that literally changed my life and changed the lives of nearly all my family members. I have so many family members who have gone to this institution, and it's changing lives for the positive now, still 122 years later. And for folks like you who want to have meaningful careers, it's a really exciting and challenging and rewarding job to be the one that, when the biggest decisions come to the end of the line, there's usually one person who has to make them. So it's really fun and exciting and challenging. Um, and I just say this isn't unique for Broncos. And I know this sounds self-serving, but I know you agree. Broncos want these big jobs.
Yeah.
Broncos want to lead. Broncos want to be part of something that's bigger than them, and they want to earn the trust and respect of teammates, where they have authority to make meaningful decisions. So I could keep going on, and I apologize for going as long as I.
I don't apologize. It's the purpose for you being here. We were supposed to be, talking about your plans for this school that yes, you graduated from, but now you're assuming leadership at a time that is very, very different than when I was there, and very, very different than when you were there. Recently, there was a CEO who was just talking about how thrilled he was that because of AI, he was able to fire 27 of 30 employees because AI could do the work and he wouldn't have to pay for raises. They wouldn't go on strike, et cetera. They wouldn't be human, right? You're now in charge of this university and you're trying to send young people out into the world, a world that doesn't want workers. Like what concerns you, as an educator now, as a leader of educators? What concerns you about the world that you're sending students off to?
Well, what that anecdote about that CEO doesn't concern me. Not because I don't think it's real, but because I think that's a challenge that education is the right place to answer. Because let's be honest, jobs, education, government, those are entities that are important, but they're meant to serve people. They're meant to help us solve the problems of the day. And I've got a couple examples to test this theory, but AI is just one more thing, one more tool that is going to be something we're going to have to learn to use in an effort to serve people, whether you're delivering a service or a good in a for-profit institution, whether you're a higher education institution trying to deliver skills and maturation to people who are going to take those into the marketplace, or whether you're a government or a religious institution where you're trying to serve communities around you. So let's just take an example, because let's assume that CEO is right. I'm not sure they're right, but we'll come back to that. Let's assume that they're right. Let's just go back maybe 50 years, well, even 30 years, LZ, when you and I were in and around college. There was this newfangled thing called email. Mm-hmm. And we never had a way to, communicate electronically. And when email started, we were going to kind of have to redo everything. And these new skill sets were going to make all the previous skill sets obsolete. and certain people were going to be out of jobs. And around that same time, we had personal computers spring up. And that was going to kind of make everyone who's in an industry to write letters, or typists or secretaries, or even professionals that would do that, they were going to be out of a job. And in each of those occasions, places like I just mentioned in higher education or in for-profit, they adapted to that new tool and built new types of jobs. And frankly, a podcast is a great example. You're getting a way to gather information and explain it in a meaningful and persuasive way to audiences that 50 years ago was done in a completely different way. But the thing that you do so well in this podcast is not so dissimilar to what was done so well in a newspaper or in a fireside chat probably 100 years ago. And so my challenge is to find a way that this new tool, AI, which clearly is going to change the way we consume and use information, no doubt about that. But how will we be able to give students the opportunity to maximize their use of that tool to bring value in those kind of people-serving ways I just talked about? And here's a couple examples. You and I know very, very well that when you have a personal conflict with another human being, and I've used AI a lot, that is very likely not going to be able to answer how to do that. And the personal conflict or the personal connection with a person are the two most valuable things that we deliver in higher education, where we start to teach people how to interact with other people to maximize their output. Now, it's true. If you were just doing spreadsheets and if you were just comparing the history of one thing to the history of the other thing, it is true that AI will make things more quickly. But another thing that AI is not going to change is the difficult problem solving associated with the interaction of humans and some task, whether it's installing an air conditioner or building a grid or deciding which part to invest in your company. The AI is going to be useful to help us make those decisions, but they're not going to replace the actual reality of humans making those decisions. So I'm excited about the opportunity for that CEO to find out that what are the limitations? The 23 people or 26 people that you said he said or she said that they were going to fire. What are the limitations of what you lost when those people go away? And I really do believe that there will be limitations, and that higher education and employers and government entities are going to have to be able to fill in that question, just like we've done with every single other various piece of technology, going back to the automobile, to telephones. These are things that changed our lives, but they did not change the reality of what we need, which is human beings that are effective at understanding information and working well with each other and avoiding and managing conflict.
I'll tell you what concerns me, and I agree a lot with what you just said. I'll tell you what concerns me as, an educator who was in the classroom pre-COVID and pandemic and has now returned post. That human interaction aspect that you were talking about and personal resolution of interactive conflict, that's a different beast now. My students aren't looking at each other in the eyes. They aren't talking to each other. They're only texting on the phones. So they're avoiding a lot of that one-on-one sort of contact that you were just referencing. Do you think the pendulum is going to swing back, or are we continuing to head towards an isolationist sort of society?
Who knows? That is a very difficult reality that we're going to actually have to confront. And it's probably been going on long before the pandemic, LZ. It probably got exacerbated by that. I mean, if you look at the way that you and I interacted with our buddies in, 4th grade and 8th grade and 9th grade versus the way that 4th and 8th and 9th graders are interacting with each other, it's very different as a result of technology. And that probably would have been the same. That kind of shift has been going on since before the pandemic. But the reality is, you and I know, because I've read what you've written, I've watched what you've said. You and I know that the more isolated humans become, the less effective they get, the more dangerous they get, the more, frankly, violent they get. And one thing that we've seen, generally speaking, is the arc of human history is that leaders figure out how to kind of push against that isolation-driven badness, whether it's violence or separation. And I got to tell you, there's no better way to build leaders than college. And leaders are the ones that are going to have to take this on. And I'll tell you, I'm excited about you teaching at Western and you examining this problem, and me getting a chance to be a leader here, because I think what we're going to have to do is push the pendulum back, which is to say, you cannot have a successful life as a person in a connected society unless you build the skills necessary to communicate effectively with people that think and act differently than you, and also that think and act like you in the few occasions where you disagree. And if you really do want to do meaningful work with your life, whether it's in your family or in your profession, you're going to have to find a way to maximize your effort. And the only way to do that is to work in teams.
There's a lot of ways people acquire leadership skills. How are you going to convince generations going forward to invest $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to develop their leadership skills?
Well, right now that answer is easiest to say that the ROI exists. And so what we say, and it's true, is that if you come to Western, 9 out of 10 of you will get a job in the field you want very soon after graduation. You come to us and you graduate, you'll make $1.2 million more over your lifetime. If you're looking for a return on your investment, our costs are about $16,000 a year, and that is very competitive. In a return, as I say, over your lifetime of $1.2 million, just on average. So the consumer of higher education now has a lot more information to compare those metrics, and we stand up very proudly on those metrics. But to answer your direct question, we've got to do a better job. We've got to do a better job saying to that 10th grader and 11th grader what I just said to you, which is, what do you want to do with yourself? What is the path to have a meaningful, prosperous life by your own terms? Do you want to live in a safe environment? Do you want to have enough money to pay for yourself and your family, whether it's just a shelter and food, or whether it's to build a business and to take vacations with your family? Do you want those things? And most folks will say yes, LZ. And then you have to say to them, well, the way you can do that is you come to Western and you get an education that involves both practical skills and experience-driven learning, but also the soft skills associated with a liberal arts education that help you get an understanding of how to appreciate and value things that are outside of your own wheelhouse. And then, above all, become the ability to have a leadership role if you choose that. But that was like 7 sentences, LZ. And today's college student doesn't want to hear 3 sentences.
They do not.
And so that's why I start with the economic return on investment.
When you think about the economic return on investment, you sound very much like a capitalist. You sound very much like a businessman. But then when you start explaining the benefits, you lean into your liberal arts aspect of it. Why don't you lead with liberal arts first? Is it because of this conversation about the cost of college that's pushing the liberal arts aspect of it to the side?
Yeah, it is. And I frankly don't think one is above the other. But I do know that the persons who are looking at whether they should themselves go to college or send their children to college, the first thing they're asking in this competitive marketplace, and I wouldn't even say it's capitalist, it's just a competitive place where if you're offering a service and a really valuable education, you've got to be able to understand what your potential students' options are. And right now, the students are asking, is this worth my return on investment? And by the way, they're getting flooded with information from all kinds of different sources that are saying things that often are not even accurate, that it's not worth the investment.
Well, let's get into it, because college is expensive. It was expensive when we went. It was expensive when I just put my son through and he graduated in 2019. It's more expensive now. Why is the cost going up so much, Russ? And at what point does the return of investment kind of taps out?
Well, to answer your first question, the reason that it's got more expensive, or the reason why it feels like it's more expensive, is because when you and I went, the percentage of revenue that this institution needed to turn the lights on, the majority of that came from the government. That came from the state government to say, we are invested in higher education, and we are going to do that to a tune of almost 75% of what the money we needed came from the government. And the rest of that came from tuition dollars. Well, because of public policy changes over the last 30 years, that metric has completely flipped. So about 70% of the revenue that Western Michigan University generates comes from tuition. So you've simply changed who's paying for this product. And look, I've disagreed with that, but and I'm going to keep disagreeing with that. But even on that, for folks like your son, over the long term, a $60,000 college education pays for itself tenfold if you're just looking at earnings, and that data is out there. But also, and sometimes even more importantly, the person that leaves college is so transformed to the better than the person who enters college that you can't even quantify that. Now, let's just think about that. That was a truth that you and I knew, at least I did, and I suspect maybe you did. We just didn't even question that.
Right.
We just knew when we were thinking about going to college that not only would we make more money, but we'd be safer and healthier and happier. And higher education for a long time rested on the fact that folks like you and me just knew that as a truism. Well, now there's a public debate about that. But simply because there's a public debate about it doesn't mean that the truism is false. It just means that we need to put forth the facts that demonstrate that. And there's two ways to do that. One is the empirical data, some of which I've already shared with you, and then other is the anecdotal data. And you're a living, breathing example of that, LZ. I mean, your story is not unique, but it is extraordinary. And that is what happens to people who go to higher education. I'll tell you, for that CEO who wants to fire a bunch of people for AI, we should go to that company and we should look at the C-suite. How many of them have a college degree? Then we should go one more level below, and those are director levels or assistant directors. How many of them have college degrees? In fact, let's look and see which one of them have grad degrees, all of which are delivered by higher education. And you can do this with students and their parents and say, you know, either TikTok and Facebook have figured out something that no one else knows, and that's where a lot of this nonsense is coming from, or you can trust these places that have highly paid, highly influential people all the way throughout: religion, government, for-profit, nonprofit, higher education, all of them. The people who are having the best, most successful lives based it on higher education when they got their first kind of step in a leadership model. So as I say, the empirical and anecdotal data is there. We just got to get better at answering those questions.
You're in love with higher education. And I say that because I go through your bio and I'm like going, dog, he went back to school again? Like you were an airline pilot, you taught at the university, you were Henry Ford's college president, you went and got your Juris Doctorate, and now you're here as president of your alma mater, the 10th at Western Michigan. Why do you love education so much? More importantly, why do you love paying for it so much?
Well, like most people, I like to pay for things that I get a lot of value out of. I don't mind paying for things that I get really good value out of. Now, I expect it to be commensurate with the value I get. I want to have a good deal. And by the way, Western has paid itself, I've gotten the value out of Western in spades. But to answer the more specific question, the reason I'm so in love with higher education is because personally, I really like to learn about things. I really like to be confronted with things that I don't understand. And frankly, I like to tell students this. Your job is to learn a skill about being curious about people and things that are different than yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you have to like it. In fact, right now, I think what social media and others are teaching is if there's anything different than your own way, you not only shouldn't be curious about it, you should reject it out of hand. I think the biggest and brightest of our generation are the people who are just generally well equipped to be curious about things that they don't understand or generally kind of disagree with. And I work hard to do that myself. But the second reason I'm so in love with higher education is because I really do enjoy working on teams that have a mission bigger than ourselves. I began that when I played high school sports. And all throughout my life, whether I was in the cockpit or whether I was in the garbage truck or whether I was in a courtroom, these types of life experiences are the most enjoyable when you're working on a team who, if we band together and actually work as a team, we can accomplish things that are so much bigger than ourselves. And there is no better place I've sensed than higher education. You know it. You're in the classroom. You and I are struggling with trying to get students to look each other in the eye and be able to use the telephone, which is another thing they hate to do. But my point is, you're there because you actually know the feeling when a student actually turns the corner and starts to see the soft skills of interacting one-on-one. You know it because you've been at the hallway where you see a student that actually is going to grow either professionally or emotionally as a result of being exposed to different ideas and life-changing education. And by the way, there are 4,000 employees here at WMU all committed to that. And so, yeah, I am in love with that prospect because I've done other things that I've really enjoyed, but nothing as life-changing for myself and the people we serve than I have seen when I've worked in higher education. I suspect that's probably why you're back teaching here.
I love it, man. I love it. I had a rough semester last fall, and I can say it now, but it was rough, in large part because I was in such physical pain. I recently had hip replacement surgery. So I spent a lot of time covering the 2024 election, just dragging my leg basically from one convention hall to the other for a good chunk. So it's hard on me physically. And I was in and out of the classroom a lot because I was constantly traveling. And so I was feeling like I had let my students down, right? Because it just wasn't what I was used to doing in the classroom. And I ran into a student of mine, I think on South Street. So I'm just walking, limping down the street, and he's coming the opposite direction. And he starts regurgitating some of my lectures to me. And I realized that while I was in my head about what I wasn't doing or what I couldn't do, my students were soaking in what I did have to offer. And it invigorated me in such a way. I was so happy that, he remembered shit because it just felt like I wasn't great. I wasn't even good. I was okay. And I hate mediocrity, particularly in myself. But in that moment of running into that student, I might have been mediocre by my standards, but apparently I still made a positive impact, and it really, really benefited me in that moment because I wasn't in a good spot when I was walking down the street that day. So you're right. It is fulfilling when students are there to confirm things.
So let me just add on to that. Let's say that student's name is Jason, or let's say Jason. Part of what you just described is a perseverance for some mission through physical pain, dedication to an institution or a job, and even when you're not feeling like really great about it, getting up in the morning. But you interact with Jason, and he probably sees in your face how much he meant to you when he regurgitated some of the lecture. And what's happening there is Jason will remember that. And he'll probably have a couple other interactions in higher education here at Western where he'll remember that. And he'll probably stay in touch with one or two of those. That's what I did. Maybe he'll stay in touch with you. And then he'll start to figure out, okay, well, this is how you build relationships with people that are both educational but emotional. This is how we move together as a community. And I just got to tell you, I do not see a future where AI can teach Jason that. Or the relationship building that happened on that street as you walked past, that was kind of quietly building throughout your time in front of the lecture hall with him. I just don't buy it that is going to become obsolete. And this is what happens at higher education. I've been around a lot of different places with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, from flying airplanes to prosecuting people to mowing lawns of cemeteries. I am telling you, there are very, very few places in our system of human interaction that have so many opportunities for the kind of life-changing interactions that you just gave one little example of. And imagine you're walking around Western Michigan University. I could probably share some stories with you where those things are popping off probably more times than we could ever even count. And if you don't believe me, and I know you do, LZ, but if your listeners don't believe me, come to Western. I will literally walk around this campus with you, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
That's a hell of a commercial there, my friend. You know what else is a great commercial? Western Michigan University, national champions. How do we keep coach? Because we know how this works, right? We're, mid-major school, and, the big boys are sniffing around trying to figure out how can we step up, and they poach all the time. We lost PJ Fleck. I went to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl because of PJ Fleck.
Should have won that
And
game.
then
Broncos should have won that game.
you know what? If it wasn't for that damn tight end, we would have. And he was gone, right? And not hating, Minnesota came with the bag and he took it. How do we keep coaches now that we're getting better athletically?
So there's several nuances to this answer, but I'll give you the high points. The first and most important thing you have to do is have an athletic director that knows how to stay ahead of the curve on these types of things.
No pressure, Dan. No pressure, Dan.
So LZ, for all those of you in the Granderson Nation, LZ is referencing Dan Bartholomew. He's in my opinion, the best athletic director in the country. He's clearly at the front of the pack on these types of questions, which is attracting and retaining top talent in your coaching. And if you haven't looked him up, go ahead and look him up, because your athletic director is the way that you're going to attract and retain talent. Now, the way that I can support him is to build a culture that both values athletics, but also helps to interweave athletics into the academic mission. Because a lot of times there's lack of understanding or maybe even antagonism between those two areas. But a president and an athletic director can actually show why this enhances the learning environment and also enhances our opportunity to show our value across our region. And then the tactical answer to that, LZ, and you know this because you've watched this, you've watched professional sports and talked about it for decades, which is what higher education athletics is becoming more of. Let's just be honest. It's becoming more professionalized with the influx of basically paying student athletes. It is to give coaches both the emotional and financial incentive to stay at an institution. All right, so the emotional one. Coaches have hard jobs. Now, some of them will chase money. That's true. But coaches like Pat Ferschweiler, who is the coach of the national championship Broncos, and I just want to say it again, LZ, the national championship.
There you go.
Broncos.
It's a good commercial.
It's a good commercial. This guy actually came from Western, which is another thing. He's coached at all levels. And I've talked to him. He wants to stay at Western because of the culture we've built under Dan Bartholomew, and I hope to be able to continue it as the new president. And if you meet his players, they actually do care about the culture of where they work and how they compete. And then the second thing is you structure contracts that make it difficult for institutions to come and take them. And that's what we've done with Pat. And we've been successful. I got to tell you, you would have already read, I think, if Pat had packed his bags.
This is true. This is true.
That you know that they move quick after that. And in the coach that you referenced earlier, that was quick. And we're almost through the summer.
So you're saying there won't be a situation where, U of M, for instance, says, hey, we didn't like getting beaten by you guys, and we're going to take your golden goose.
So I was with Coach Ferschweiler at Comerica Park, which is where the Detroit Tigers play in downtown Detroit, where he threw out the opening pitch. Part of my job is retaining talent. I talked to him directly, told him how excited I was to work with him. This weekend, we'll be in Chicago at Wrigley Stadium, where he'll throw the pitch out again. And I say to him, hey, how many times, you won the national championship. You're clearly one of the best coaches in college hockey, maybe in any hockey. How many times will you have the president and the athletic director supporting you to such an extent where your team gets to go and throw pitches out in the summer? And by the way, Pat, we really hope you stay, and we think you should. And, some conversations are confidential and private, so I won't go into great detail. But
did you offer him Sweetwater donuts?
I did not. He's a pretty strict guy, LZ. I don't know if he watches Star Wars at the middle of the night, the same motivations. But if you'd like me to ask him, and if you think that that'll help, then you could come pick me and Pat up, and we'll go to Sweetwater.
I'll deliver a dozen every morning if that would help.
He's, aside from being a great coach, I don't know if you've had a chance to interact with him or
not much at all.
I'll tell you, talk about leadership. He's building future leaders who are going to be doctors and police officers and our architects and teachers in our communities. And by the way, they're going to be poster children for folks like you are for Western. These are what Western grads do, and Pat buys into that. So I'm quite optimistic that we're going to have Coach Ferschweiler. And I don't know if you told your listeners this, but we're going to be building a new stadium in
Yes.
Kalamazoo to host them. It'll be a $515 million arena where it'll be state-of-the-art college hockey viewing. You just wait. We've got about 2 years before that opens up. Construction's already began. And so when you want to see world-class college hockey, come to Kalamazoo, where Pat Ferschweiler hopefully will be here for decades.
When you think about the changes in athletics, there's the poaching of the coaches, and you mentioned it earlier, there's also the compensation for students.
Yeah.
Where are you with that? Because it's my understanding this is your first experience at a major institution having to deal with this aspect of athletics. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. So, I could give you my personal opinion about and I was a high school athlete. I played a lot of sports. I was never quite good enough to play Division I athletics, and I would have been really excited just at the prospect to be a walk-on at a place like Western. But the truth is, this is a reality that is not. You can't fight this reality if you are so inclined. We are going to be competitive by paying student athletes at Western Michigan University. We've already started it, by the way. And with our athletic director, we're going to continue to do it. Now, what we're going to also try to do is raise that money outside of the institution so that it doesn't detract from the general operating fund of the university. But each of us that have the privilege of leading these higher education institutions, we are in a new frontier. So it doesn't matter if you had 20 years of experience at an institution like big college institutions or 2 years. We're in a new frontier. And the way I believe to be successful is, number one, build a culture where student athletes are treated like up-and-coming leaders and given a culture where they actually enjoy the learning interaction between the competitive field and the classroom. And I know we have that. And then also getting serious about the economics of higher education athletics now, which is going to include raising money to pay athletes.
Do you like saying that, paying athletes? Because we're old school, right? We, even if it wasn't true, we still had the, they're amateurs, they're doing it for the love of the game. But now, it's that's all over. Like, are you okay with that?
Yeah. If you have an athletic department that actually cares about the student's academic journey, which we do, and which we insist on, last semester, if you ran into 4 student athletes at Western Michigan University, 3 of them would have over a 3.5 across our entire spectrum. If you went and looked at how many community service hours every athletic department in Division I has across our country, Western Michigan University is in the top 3 community service. And these are our student athletes going out to food banks, going out to public schools, going out to retirement homes, finding out what it means to be a community member and doing community service. We're really, really proud of that. And that's part of the educational mission. Now, the reality is, if we're not going to be serious about an athletic department winning, and that is not the only thing an athletic department should do, but it has to be one of them. You want your athletic department to be successful academically. You want them to be building good leaders, which is part of our community service entrepreneurism, and you want them to win on the athletic field. And that third one, you will not be competitive unless you pay competitive salaries, and that's what these are. You're paying them a salary to perform on the athletic field. At this point, that is the reality.
There's another reality. Is one that I'm actually wrestling with right now, and I'm sure I have other colleagues on campus who are trying to figure this out as well. And that is, justifying your existence, right? But let's cut to the chase. I'm in an industry as a journalist, and yeah, I went to Western. I got the Western Herald newspaper background, Wider is my background, radio, like all of it. I maximized my experience, and I was able to benefit at it when I graduated. The landscape is very different now for students who are in communications, particularly journalism and in media. What is your philosophy in terms of maintaining the resources for these schools if enrollment is beginning to erode because of the changes in the industry? It's kind of like what the school went through with paper science, and the more digital we became, the less need there was for paper scientists.
So, this institution's been around for 123 years. And it would be a mistake if we were teaching from the same textbook and the same curricula 100 years from today. So we went back 100 years, whatever those students, those Broncos were learning and teaching back then, it would be a mistake if we were teaching and learning the same curricula. So, and I don't think anyone will quibble with that. We have to acknowledge that we'll have to continually understand the intersection of traditional education and tomorrow's needs for society. Now, those are hard decisions, and I don't have any news to report on that now. But one factor of that is enrollment. It is not the only factor for that. An additional factor is, what is the societal benefit that we offer as a publicly funded institution? So I will tell you, there are some programs here where enrollment is always going to be low, and it's always going to be an expensive program. But we believe that it's worth investing in, despite the fact that it might, on a pure P&L or profit and loss analysis, it might not make as much money as it costs, but it delivers a pivotal societal benefit. The fine arts are a good example of that. So any college administrator who doesn't deny that there's a balance there, I think, would be less than truthful, and we'll continue to do that. But let's talk about the one you just talked about. I serve on the board of a foundation that looks at this very, very important question, and that is, where are our citizens getting information for which they base their life decisions on? And that has been transformed so quickly. And I know you know that, but your listeners may not realize that when LZ and I were coming up, like, we literally got the information about the things we liked, which were the sport. Like, you actually opened the paper and read the box score. And if your dad, hadn't seen the paper yet, then you tried to sneak it and give it back to him because, you didn't want to. I mean, it was like you had a desperately small amount of ways to get meaningful information. But there were also a lot of regulation. And I don't mean regulation in the sense of government regulation. There were a lot of controls such that information had a high degree of specificity and, frankly, quality control. Well, both of that's gone now. The information is not hard to get, and there are very little controls on the specificity and quality of it. So to me, I would say to you, if you are a person thinking about going into journalism, I would say this is an opportunity for you to figure out how to deliver a very, very pivotal service, if you think of it as a public service, or a product if you want to monetize this value. But you're going to have to be on your toes. You're going to have to be willing to understand that the market is going to change so much more quickly. And look, you don't have to look very far than WMU alumni who have done it. And I'm talking to one now. So
I'm hanging on by fingernails, brother. Don't.
Well, I mean, when you were writing columns, did you think you'd run a podcast?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. I had no plans of being on television, to be quite honest with you. What I really wanted to do, you're going to laugh when I tell you my first dream job. I wanted to be a university president. You can ask, or you can't now, but the former president, or Dieter Heineck, was my president when I was on campus. And I would shadow him from time to time. And then when I went to graduate school, I went to grad school for higher education administration. And I got to shadow more presidents. And I decided, no, this is not what I want to do with my life. Yeah. Not because I didn't find it enjoyable. What I didn't like was realizing how little interaction I had with students. and how much more interaction I had with fundraisers, CEOs, elected officials. There was way more administrative aspect to the career, and I really wanted to be involved in the pedagogy of it all. And so it shifted my viewpoint. I ended up, my first full-time job was actually covering higher education. So I had all this education, and so I understood it inside and out, so I could cover it as a journalist. But I quickly realized that everyone's not built to be a university president, and that certainly wasn't me. So, whatever you have, brother, God bless you. You have it in spades because this is your second school. I didn't even want to work for a school once I got to grad school anymore.
That is so interesting. I did not know. And I was a prosecutor for some time, so I often come to these well equipped with some background information. I like to investigate. I did not know that. And it's so funny, LZ, because I can promise you, I didn't even, if you were to ask me in my 20s, even my early 30s, if I had an interest in being the president of any higher education institution, I would have laughed at you. I would have said, no way. I'm not equipped, nor do I want that job. But I will tell you that your question was, what can Russ, what can you say to students who are thinking about going into journalism? Look, there's a reckoning coming eventually when someone starts to figure out what the baseline is for public information or somewhat public information. Like when we finally decide what types of media, whether it's social media or hard media or podcast, it seems to me, and I'd like your opinion about this, but that jury's still out. Like we're still trying to figure out what is really the way to move information, and if we're going to have any guardrails associated with it. And what a really exciting time to be in the field. I mean, I was in aviation as an undergrad. I've always thought, man, it would have been pretty neat to have been in aviation when they were just figuring out how to do power flight. And that's, not entirely different than what journalism's facing right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because there is a financial aspect to it, right? And that I don't have a problem with. But in today's political climate, that's not the only influence in terms of decisions that are being made in newsrooms across this country. And then there's the trust factor that the public has. And the thing that I've learned was, over the years, because I've been, blessed to work at, a lot of major media companies, was that it wasn't the call letters that people trusted. The call letters got your attention, but it was still at the end of the day, the integrity of the journalist that people was invested in. And so, my hope for my industry is that even as we continue to shift from the economics and we shift in terms of the politics of it all, what remains true is that people will gravitate towards those voices they believe and they trust. It's just about weeding out the people who aren't good actors, if we will, in this media space, who are here to make money and not here to make a difference in people's lives.
I agree with you, and I've been on a small scale listening tour on this topic because I completely agree with you that the messenger is the person that influences people, not the brand that they travel under. And the anecdote I usually give is because I hear people, they'll tell me, well, X or Y is true. And I'll ask, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? And they'll say things that I don't like to hear because they're not reputable sources. I'm not going to go into detail, but there are some places that are just,
full of shit. I said it, not you.
But they're very, very effective in getting clicks and getting views. Yep. And so what I say is, okay, I want you to imagine that you walked into a doctor's office and they told you your mother just got examined and she's got a blockage of her heart. She needs to have her heart cut open this afternoon. How would you decide whether to, and by the way, she's knocked out. You're gonna have to make this decision because you're power of attorney. How would you make that decision? Like what kind of sources of information would you want? Or maybe you've saved up a bunch of money for 20 years and you're finally going to be able to build your own dream house. and who would you go to try and we can keep this going, but the point is humans do selectively pick the people we rely on based on the amount we trust them. And there are things that we use as indicia of trustworthiness. How is it that we've divorced ourselves of some of those basic indicia of trustworthiness on these types of things, like the things that we see on some social media? I continue to ask people to say, okay, well, let's just be just a bit more of a precise consumer of information like we would in these other places. And I'm not winning, LZ, but I think what I worry about is that people just don't take it as seriously. That if you're going to build an opinion about a group of people or a political position or these types of things, you get to be a much more precise consumer of information. And I've gone so far. You'll laugh at this. I've gone so far to buy my friends on both political spectrums reputable hard newspaper subscriptions.
Kick it old school, baby.
I got a conservative buddy. I said, look, there's a thing called the Wall Street Journal. I want you to, if I buy you a subscription, will you read that? It's owned by Rupert Murdoch. It don't worry, you just read it instead of some of these other outlets. And I've got friends on the other side, and I said, if I buy you a subscription to a newspaper, will you at least read this newspaper rather than getting your news on some of these other things that people scroll through on their phone? I truly believe that that's something that if somebody figures it out, and it probably will be a Bronco who came through the journalism program, figures out a way to sell that to the masses better than my little project, that I hope is the future.
Last question for you, my friend. When it's all said and done and you're ready to, take your last Sweetwater donut run and go retire, what do you want to be remembered most for at Western Michigan University? You're in your first month. You're the 10th president. You're at a critical time in our society. What will be your hallmark?
There are two audiences that I have different answers for. The first audience is the people that I've been given the privilege and honor to lead. I hope that those people say that I was a trustworthy and truthful, fair leader. And those three words mean something to me, that they could trust me when I said something. And that when I made tough decisions, I did it based on fairness. Leading people is really exciting and really hard and really important. And I hope that the people I have had the privilege to lead thought I did it. I'm hoping for like an A- on that front because it's so darn hard. And then the people like you who care about the institution and have cared about it for decades and more than a century, some folks. So I hope that they see the time that I had the baton, and that's what this is. There was a former president of the United States who described this as a relay race. You get the baton from the president before you. And by the way, I'm not suggesting this is nearly as hard as running the country, but I do believe it is a relay race because I just don't believe any president should think of themselves as the hallmark of some age associated with the institution. You're running a relay race and you're given the baton and given the opportunity to keep this institution heading in the right direction, changing its direction when it needs to, and sustaining it from its 123-year history. And I hope that when I hand the baton off, hopefully it's a willing handoff, that when I hand it off to the next president, I can say, look, this place for 123 years has been a place where people of all walks of life can come and get a better life through public education and leave better people. And from the time I've had the baton, we're still that. And if I can say that, I'll say that it was a success for that second, much broader window of people who are the kind of folks like you, alumnus, community members, students, futures, past. That's what I'd like to be able to say.
It's wonderful. Russ Kavalhuna, which airline did you work for?
I worked for U.S. Airways. It doesn't exist anymore.
Oh,
but you'll remember.
I remember.
Yeah, you were probably going in and out of Washington on that.
Yes, sir.
I worked for a company owned by U.S. Airways called U.S. Airways Express. And the
Yep.
funny thing, I started, airline pilots did not make a lot of money at that time. I started on a 32 passenger turboprop, and I think my first year salary in 2001, I think it was $16,000 a year.
In 2001?
Yeah,
After
yeah,
college?
yeah, yeah,
Holy moly.
yeah, yeah. And man, I loved every minute of it. I loved every minute as a new airline pilot, and I probably would have stayed in it, but 9/11 happened, and I got laid off. So life happens, and you make
Life
pivots.
happens.
But yeah, U.S. Airways Express. You might have been on my airplane a few times out of DCA.
Well, I appreciate you landing softly.
Wow.
U.S. U.S. Airways pilot, former prosecutor, current president of Western Michigan University. Incredible journey, incredible man. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm really looking forward to working with you as a partner and helping to make Western the best school in the country, but also, and I think perhaps more importantly, remind people that college is worth it.